most of you are familiar with the Enneagram, and I wanted to mention it because the Enneagram, I think, has been largely misunderstood. Essentially, it's almost used now as a sort of like a character evaluator. You know, what type of character are you? And people will quote a number in the Enneagram. They'll say I'm a 9 or I'm a 1, and they're just different character types if you're not familiar with it. But the Enneagram isn't like a character a strength finder. It's a sin finder. Because what the Enneagram's thesis is that our strength is covering our weakness. So, number 1 to 9, if you don't know it, number 1 is a reformer, a person who seeks justice or perfection, and that's seen as a strength. But really, what that covering is a fear of inadequacy, a fear of imperfection, a fear of injustice, a fear of not being adequate. And number 2 is a carer. So number 2 will care for everybody. But the sin of the carer is a fear of not being cared for, cared about, not caring. Number 3 is the success person, a person who's successful. They're terrified of failure. So the real issue around the Enneagram is, if you're looking at success, don't sort of elaborate on that. See what you're actually avoiding in yourself. And so it's apparent that, in fact, last week somebody was in a group I was in introducing themselves, and I was listening to his words because I know this person well, and what he's saying about himself is exactly what he isn't. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And I realized that when we say things, we're often saying things, the words we say, when we make them into words, they are words because they don't exist in reality. I remember, I mentioned this before, but a firm in Joburg had a massive sign up and it said, "We care." And I went in and very soon realized they cared, not at all. But they had to say it because it wasn't real. And so often people are saying something because it isn't existing. If it exists, you don't need to say it. You don't say, "I've got hair," if you haven't, if you've got hair. Or, it's like, you don't, sorry, you don't say the obvious. But so often we'll say what we hope for, what we long for, what we want to convince ourselves about. When actually, in fact, today I was counseling somebody, and he strikes me as a very sort of aggressive sort of person. And he said, "Well, I'm very compliant." And I thought, really? And so, it's like, what do we say about ourselves? How do we see ourselves? And are we saying what we would like to be? Is what we say about ourselves what somebody else would say about us? A sibling, or a friend, or an enemy? How would they describe us? Would they use the same words? Often I think we say things to almost convince ourselves, or to... it's not that we're lying to ourselves, but we're hoping to become something. We want to be something. And so we tell ourselves that we'll be that in an effort to get somewhere. Does that make sense? And so we can ask ourselves, what do I tell myself? And how do I explain reality to myself? Because in our mind, we're justifying or rationalizing what we don't understand. I was trying to think of a question we could ask ourselves to actually help to see where we're real and where we're fooling ourselves. Because it's very easy to be unreal with ourselves. And often a close friend or somebody who's... it's also interesting who we befriend and who we confide in, because we tend to confide in people who will agree with us and not in people who will disagree with us. And to speak to somebody who says, "No, but it's not like that." You say you're kind, but why did you kick the cat? It's like, what's going on? Somebody who will call us on because we almost like are scared. We don't challenge each other. relationships seem to be getting more and more superficial generally, because we know lots of people, but we don't have deep friendships, and so we miss that place where we can actually be real with each other to the point of saying things that are hard, and not necessarily pleasant. But I'm saying, can we see in ourselves where we're fooling ourselves, where we actually are embracing ideas that aren't helpful in terms of where we're moving, what we're doing. And that's why it's a lot more difficult to have family relationships than friendships, because friendships you can choose, but family relationships you can't, and they usually know everything about everything. And so it's we tend to choose friends that suit us. It's interesting to look at the friendships that have died and ask ourselves why those friendships have died or gone cold, or relationships have sort of ended, and what the mechanism was, because often we get to a place in relationships as we go deeper where we find stuff that in ourselves is difficult, and we are mirrors for each other. We can only see it through the other. We don't see it on our own. That's why maybe it's difficult to say, how do I see myself? Because I only see myself through others. And the more true I can be with others, the more I can see who I really am. Whereas, it's very easy in a society to be nice or just to say the right thing, and not fool everybody. How do I, of all the things I've been saying, how aware are we of our own mind talk and what it's saying to us? Because in a sense we have to distance ourselves from it and see what it's doing. The big problem we have with our minds is we think we are our mind. We're not. We have a mind, and we have to manage our mind. We have to control our mind. We have to develop our mind. We tend to leave it and think, well, I am my mind. I can do nothing about it. It is what it is. And that's the worst we can do, because our mind can take us anywhere. And if that's happening, we will be totally taken astray. We'll become totally victimized by our mind. Because if it wants to hammer us on something, how many people just have enormously problematic issues in their mind, and then they put you onto medication because they say your mind's not working. But it's mainly because we've allowed our mind to develop bad habits, and we don't know that we can actually do anything about it. And so the easiest is to just medicate it and just get it under control. But it's like having a dog, and you never train it, and you wonder why it's jumped up onto the table and taken the butter. You just haven't trained it, and then you want to get rid of the dog. So it's important that we realize that our mind is something we have to manage and have to develop, and it's our responsibility, not our teachers, not the educational system. I'll talk about that just after the break, because they do more damage, in a sense, because they tell you this is how your mind should be, and we become victims of our own mind.